Is there anything you would have done differently?
We reported a true story.
Our colleague Brian Williams is back in Kuwait City tonight after a close call in the skies over Iraq.
Controversial Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh and questions about Kavanaugh's drinking in the past.
Sean Hannity, come on up, Sean Hannity.
Today, Andrew Cuomo is having a moment.
Hi, I'm Chris Steyerwald.
You just had people thinking they tuned into the wrong
Oh,
podcast.
yeah.
And I'm Eliana Johnson.
Welcome to Ink-Stained Wretches, where we break down what's going wrong and what's going right with the American news media. Eliana Johnson, we're back.
After a 1-week break.
Well, 1 week where we delivered a payload of excellence with the great Eli Lake. I hope everybody got a chance to hear. I don't always listen to all of our episodes. But I listened to that one, and there was so much more in it about the best books and movies and TV about the news business. It was great, and Eli was great. And I want to apologize to the listeners who caught the unbleeped bleep. Some of our movie selections were extraordinarily profane, and Colin caught 99%. But one got past the goalie, and we apologize for that, but hope you enjoyed it. Just be aware that when you get to the All the President's Men section, tender ears should not be listening.
I know.
I stipulate for the record that you're more of a caveat emptor kind of a broadcaster.
Yeah.
Yes.
Chris, on our front page.
Yes. It's
As
almost
always,
time.
we are starting with politics, and we have Fox News begging
Donald Trump, come
for
on,
Trump to show up.
Let's listen.
To the 2024 GOP debate, which is taking place in about 2 weeks in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I will be there, and we will record the following day. Are you going?
I don't know yet.
Okay, well, I know. I will be there. Barring unforeseen events, and we'll report back the following day to listeners.
Even if Trump is not there, you will be enough.
Yes.
You will be enough. You are sufficient. Okay, so let's take a listen to Fox and Friends making the case to the Donald to appear on the network's debate.
Yeah, look, I know he's angry at everything that he feels this administration or the Democrats, the DOJ, have put him through. But don't take it out on the Republicans, because Republicans want to see him up on stage. And don't take the voters for granted. Yes, He is ahead by a lot. But to see him up there on the stage would just be wonderful, because we want to see how they interact. We want to hear their policies.
That's how he became Donald Trump the first time.
He made it entertaining.
He blew everybody away at the first Fox debate.
I take a little bit of exception, and I'm interested in your thoughts on this. I take a little bit of exception to the host network intervening in this process. I do think they should let this thing play out. It is a campaign decision, and let Trump make his own mistakes.
Well, I definitely fall on the side of the fact that debates are TV shows.
Okay.
And a debate is a TV show. They're not. I've complained here at length about the degree and now obviously unfortunate degree to which the RNC has tried to orchestrate things around these debates. It's in both the party's interest and the network's interest for there to be cleavage between the party and the network. And that way the party doesn't have to be accountable for all the standards. They don't have to be accountable for all of those things. They can just say, yep, it's a debate, and we're not – Eliana, the word sanction is a funny word, because previously what parties tended to do – we've only had debates, televised debates in primaries since 1980. And in the previous era, what parties would do would be they would sanction candidates who participated in unsanctioned debates, right? So if you participated in a debate that was not allowed, then you could be penalized delegates at the convention. That was the idea, to try to prevent a million debates from taking place. Now the emphasis goes differently, in which the party sanctions specific debates and gives them their imprimatur and is partnering. So that makes it very sticky. But at its core, this is a TV show. And Fox has got and they're partnering with the Young Americans for Freedom, I think.
And Rumble.
Sure. Sorry, Rumble. But Fox is hosting a television show, and they want the best television show that they can get. I don't think it's in Donald Trump's interest necessarily to attend that debate. I think that if I'm Trump, let me tell you what. If I was Donald Trump, my tie would be longer. But also, it is true to say that if I was Donald Trump, here's what I would want. I would want that debate to go on without me. And I would want Chris Christie, particularly, or whomever, to start going after Trump with him in absentia. And then force the other people on the stage to defend Trump. Because that's what Tim Scott doesn't want. That's what Ron DeSantis doesn't want. That's what Mike Pence doesn't want, to be in a position where they kind of have to stick up for Trump, or the conversation turns that Christie becomes the skunk at the garden party, and the rest of them separate themselves from Christie by either being mum on Trump or even defending Trump.
Do you think he shows up or not?
I think that given his lead in the polls, and also given what history says about what frontrunners do with debates, I would say no. Now, what makes this different is that Trump, as his legal woes deepen, can't afford to be seen as in the basement, right? And Donald Trump ducking a debate works different. Donald Trump not debating is different than Mitt Romney not debating or Jeb Bush not debating, as they both chose to do in early debates in their cycles. He's the front runner, but he's a front runner who is famous for being pugilistic and tough and all of those things. If he is seen to be ducking, that will be one of the top. If he doesn't go, the top takeaway, I disagree. I understand why Steve Doocy is making the case the way that he is. But the number one reason for Trump to participate in the debate is that if he does not go, he will look like he's scared of it.
I don't think he's made up his mind.
I'm sure that's
they are
right.
Sending mixed messages. You have Kellyanne Conway on the one hand saying keep the podium warm.
Right.
And at the same time, the executives at Fox would not be beseeching him, begging him to show up if he had indicated he would be there.
From a business perspective, there's lots of money on the line for Fox here of a debate with Trump and a debate without Trump in terms of viewership, for sure.
All right. Speaking of the other candidates, we had Ron DeSantis.
Ronnie D.
After laying off 30% of his campaign, replacing his campaign manager yesterday. So Janera Peck, who was running the campaign and who was a disciple of Phil Cox, who had been overseeing the governor's re-election in 2022, replaced by DeSantis' chief of staff, James Utmeyer, I believe is how you pronounce his last name. I could be wrong on that.
Apologies if not.
Yes. Sorry, James.
Utmeyer.
Replaced by James.
Yes.
Who has never run a campaign, doesn't have campaign experience. He's a lawyer.
Right.
And who was chief of staff in the governor's office. And so DeSantis, it's funny, a sort of Cheney thing happened here where DeSantis had asked Utmeyer, could you interview people on the campaign, ask them what's gone wrong here, and come to me with an assessment of what the problems are? And all of a sudden, Utmeyer's replaced Janera Peck as campaign manager, which is, how Cheney ran the search process for Bush's VP and ended up as the VP. Anyhow,
on the politics, before we get to the media part here, only to say that what this sounds like is that Janera Peck will stay around and Cox will be around, but this actually makes sense to me. Because what you want is a day-to-day person to execute these things and make sure that people are showing up and doing what they're doing. And this campaign manager is more manager than strategist, right, as the name indicates. And I think this is a perfectly reasonable choice. Unreasonable, though. Here is the following paragraph from the New York Times coverage of this decision. Rather than ripping off the Band-Aid all at once, Mr. DeSantis' campaign has made successive rounds of changes in recent weeks that have been an enduring distraction as he tries to reverse his decline in polls. He has taken these bus trips, blah, 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 blah. Enduring distraction to who? Why, to the reporters themselves. So not to say that Ron DeSantis has been doing well lately. He has not. But this is a perfect example of the self-licking ice cream cone that is presidential campaign coverage.
I don't agree with you.
Okay.
It is newsworthy when a campaign has these
For sure.
kinds of problems. And the media is a part of these campaigns that
Understood.
he has to contend with. So the fact that he is having to go in and order an assessment of what is wrong with his campaign is actually a distraction to the campaigning he is supposed to be doing. So sure, like the process stuff, it is what the media loves to cover. There is a smug self-righteousness and clear pleasure that the media is taking in covering DeSantis. At the same time, I had lunch with a reporter friend, mainstream reporter friend the other week, and we were talking about, DeSantis's pitch to voters is supposed to be competence.
Right.
And his campaign is displaying such incompetence. The contrast is really striking.
All of that is true. Undoubtedly, that the pains. Again, this is more politics than press, but the idea, the Jeff Rowe, all of the Ted Cruzian all of the stuff, the abstract strategy that they brought in, their misplaced expectations, and the misplaced expectations that they encouraged in others, all of that stuff. This has been a cluster bleep, right? This has been a thoroughgoing strategic goof. And you're right, it does point to a weakness in DeSantis's central campaign pitch, much as the fact, look, in the end, the problem is, as always, with the candidate himself. And I use as a one good to isolate into one moment. He's trying to get his ship righted, and he's trying to get back on track. He's doing an interview, and he just says, yeah, we'll send RFK Jr. down to the FDA. We'll get him straightened out down there. You're like...
The CDC.
To the CDC. And this is on, like, some niche, and when I say niche, I wish that we had a niche as big as that podcast, so feel free. But to go on, if he went on Ink-Stained Wretches and said... And we don't have politician guests, so don't ask. But
don't rule anything out, Chris.
I guess he's written a book. We can have him come and talk about his book.
Don't rule anything out.
But having Meatball
limit us.
Come on here and say, yeah, maybe we'll send this guy down to, maybe we'll send this wackadoodle down to the FDA and straighten him out. You're not helping, right? So he has had bad instincts, and all of that is true. Hundred pity. My point here is, so you have the reporter for the Times saying what he should have done rather than ripping the Band-Aid off all at once. And by the way, DeSantis, it points to another failure of DeSantis that he is not able to shape the media narrative better, right? The media, as you say, is part of the story. And it should not be surprising to him, and it is not surprising to me that the coverage is this way. My only narrow point is, when the press talks about these problems, they're really talking about the problems of their own perceptions, right? We don't like the way that you're doing. We think you're doing it wrong, and this is a problem for you. For voters in Boone, Iowa, right, this is not what they're talking and thinking about. But the press coverage of it creates downstream problems. It is DeSantis' fault that he's not controlling it, but it would be better if the people covering the campaign trail understood that they were the audience for this stuff, not the rank and file voter.
What about the Associated Press piece about DeSantis
Well, that's just fair. It's just this next one is just a straightforward.
DeSantis is defending new slavery teachings. Civil rights leaders see a pattern of, quote, policy violence.
Policy violence. I mean, it's just if everything is violence, nothing is violence, right? If everything is violence, then nothing is violence. And the misappropriation of the word violence to describe things that are not violent is real bad, not just for Meatball here. And it, again, this stuff probably helps him because the more the press attacks DeSantis, the better his potential voters probably like it. But holy cannoli, policy violence, Associated Press. And the quote is from, I want to get it right.
I'll read it. African American leaders decry what they call a pattern of, quote, policy violence against people of color imposed by the DeSantis administration that reached a low point after the recent release of an, quote, anti-woke public school curriculum on Black history. That's it.
DeSantis has perfected
yes.
the art of using policy violence that we must stop, said Derek Johnson, president and CEO of the NAACP. His organization issued a travel advisory for Florida in May, warning African Americans against DeSantis' aggressive attempts to erase Black history and restrict diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in Florida schools. I don't know Derek Johnson, but I assume Derek Johnson says a lot of things, right? And the problem with this story is the credulous, like, well, people are saying that a lot of people are saying that this is policy violence. Don't use that word when it doesn't mean what it is supposed to mean. And Associated Press should do way better than that.
I'm not holding out hope, Chris. And we debated whether to talk about this because it's a little bit of old news
but
now.
There's a lot going on in Biden family land.
The People magazine late on a Friday night popped an exclusive. President Biden speaks out on Hunter's daughter 4 with Arkansas woman. Quote, Jill and I only want what's best. And the quote was Biden for the first time referring to his 7 grandchildren.
Right.
This is not a political issue. It's a family matter. President Biden's statement continues. Jill and I only want what's best for all of our grandchildren, including Navy. You know, nothing so heartfelt as issuing a formal statement
to People magazine.
Recognizing your granddaughter on a Friday evening.
So Friday night is the turkey drop or the taking out the trash for your public utterances in office. You do it, especially in the summertime. You do it in the late afternoon on a Friday and figure that it'll be gone by Monday. This is significant. This is journalistically significant for a couple reasons. One, the strategy, choosing people, doing that. Number 2, Maureen Dowd gets results. Right? We talked here about her column a few weeks ago in which she said it's 7 grandchildren, not 6, Mr. President, and just took the bark off of Joe Biden for putting himself forward piously as a family man and America's pop, and then shunning his granddaughter in Arkansas. And she got results. So Biden did change approach. And I think the other thing I would say is that this is a signal for the shift in the way the administration is approaching the problem of the story of the Biden family in the press. The Hunter Biden plea deal debacle was a mile marker on the road to a point where Democrats, basically, if Joe Biden can't deal with his son, his party and the political apparatus and sympathetic voices in the media are going to do it for him. And I have watched the journey on Hunter Biden.
Well, what do you mean by that? So,
story A about Hunter Biden. It's an inspiring story of recovery. Here was this person very troubled, and he's better now. And what a good, and every American family can relate to this because addiction has touched the lives of almost every American in some way, and people can understand.
So by that, do you mean that Biden himself wasn't going out and saying that? It was allies saying that for him?
Biden took the understandable tact of saying publicly, I'm very proud of my son.
He's the smartest person I've ever met in my life.
Wow.
Is what he said.
Wow. And I know some of the people Joe Biden has met. Like, Joe Biden has met a lot of very smart people. Hunter Biden, maybe less so. Janet Yellen or Hunter Biden. I'm not sure.
Well, I don't know. That's
I
don't know, Chris.
The reality of, and we've talked here about the stories. from NBC, New York Times, and other places about people can't talk to Biden about his son. That was one mile marker. The public coverage, the mainstream media coverage of that Biden is not able to address this issue internally. And what we have seen, I believe, is Hunter Biden is going to be drummed out by Democrats and by sympathetic voices in the press, and that we have gone from inspiring story to this is a distraction. So stage 2 was this is just a distraction that Republicans are whipping up to try to keep attention off of Trump. Now we're in stage 3. Hunter Biden is a jerk, right? The final stage, and I think you saw this with the coverage of the Devin Archer testimony about, and obviously it's sympathetic to Biden to say, well, he didn't know what Hunter Biden was putting him on these phone calls about. He didn't, he was blindsided. He was unwitting about the way that Hunter Biden was using him. But I think we have, from a narrative, from a mainstream narrative, we've gone from Hunter Biden, inspiring story of recovery, to Hunter Biden distraction, to now Hunter Biden is rotten. And I think that's was a logical way that would have to go, because he is an unaffordable luxury. If Joe Biden thinks that he can invite Hunter Biden to state dinners and hang out with this guy in a public way, I don't think that his party and the press are going to let that happen. We also got this very amusing report. And again, this is the funniest story about monkeypox ever. Well, a great way that the mainstream media does not put 2 and 2 together. Politico West Wing Playbook had a report on the highest paid staffers in the Biden White House, and they report the highest paid staffers in 2023 are detailees, with the highest earner at $260,718 being Dmitry Daskalakis, who helped lead the White House monkeypox response team. That dynamic can lead to some awkwardness, with some detailees making significantly more than their peers and sometimes even more than their boss. Okay, the monkeypox advisor has gone out to talk about how he supports the joy of risky sex and walk down a runway at a fashion show in a harness and all this stuff. They don't say, this is the guy making $260,000. Take a look, guys. Maybe we want to, raise some questions about this. No, so they didn't put that together, but it's obscene. That's not a bad amount of jack. For working in the White House, and I'm sure what does a cabinet secretary make these days? I have no idea. President's knocking down 400, I think. Is that still right? A little more than 400, maybe. But that's the president. Yeah, that's the president. I don't know what a cabinet secretary makes. 235 for serving in the United States cabinet. Dimitri's crushing the Secretary of State. Take that. Yeah. Okay. Speaking, I too can walk down a runway in a harness. Well, more power to you. More power to you. But would you do it for $260? Yes. All right, there you go. 100%. Speaking of attire and politics, New York Times interview with John Fetterman. By the way, how many times has this story been written? I'm so sick of profiles of John Fetterman and references to his hoodie. Find another beat and figure to cover. John Fetterman, hoodie and all, is adjusting to life in the Senate. Break. This is, and I want to give credit and blame as it is due. This is an interview. Annie Carney, writing for the Times. And Time Magazine put him on the cover. Time Magazine put John Fetterman on the cover? Yep, and that was a Molly Ball piece that how John Fetterman came out of the darkness. Came out 8 days before this New York Times piece. Everyone's written this piece. Wow. That is some good spinning by Team Fetterman. And I guess he is a figure of fascination. He is famous and all of that stuff. But the questions are in this interview are something special. Were they tough? You've been in Congress for just over 6 months. What is your overall impression of how the place functions? What does all the political posturing does all that political posturing make you cynical about Washington? You've introduced legislation to expand access to contraception with more than a dozen Democratic co-sponsors. Is there any Republican support for that in the Senate? Pennsylvania is going to be critical in the 2024 presidential election. You're seeing a lot of President Biden. Are you at all concerned about his age? Is it difficult to keep talking about your own struggles with mental health, or do you enjoy the responsibility of the new role? Even before you checked yourself into Walter Reed for treatment for depression, you were a figure of fascination on Capitol Hill. Other senators would even stop you for selfies. Why is there so much interest in you? You're living alone in Washington, separated for most of the week from your 3 kids and your wife, who still live in Braddock, PA. No question, just statement. 6 years is a long term. Would you consider moving your family to Washington for a sustainable work-life balance?
You know what? I hope when my turn in the barrel comes, if the New York Times ever chooses to write about me, do you think the questions will be like this for me?
But how about
why are you such a piece of crap?
Okay, so here's a question. Do you think David McCormick, the businessman who lost Republican nomination to Dr. Oz in your Senate race, will run against Senator Bob Casey of Pennsylvania next year? At least it's not a tough question, but it's a question. Then we get right back on track with this one. Do you think the multiple indictments of former President Donald Trump will hurt him politically in your state? And
in defense of this, it's kind of hard to ask him tough questions given his
so don't do it. And then the last one. Ever think about dropping the sweatshirt and shorts uniform and just wearing a suit in Congress? Are you ready to buckle down and give up your lovable outsider image and put on a suit? Q&A, right? This is why you don't do Q&A. This is why you just write a piece so that people can't read your questions, because obviously, and you know this is true, sometimes the questions aren't important. You just want to give people an opportunity to talk, and sometimes you get a great piece without having to ask very difficult questions. But this is, uncool.
It's like a lot of all the other Fetterman pieces.
Yeah, it's just there isn't an exact analog on the Republican side that you can find. But just imagine.
We know why, Chris.
Well, but just imagine if somebody did this with Mitch McConnell. You recently froze at the microphone and were unable to get your train of thought. What enchants you about...
What was that like for you emotionally?
Yeah, what was that like for you emotionally? How did you feel? When people say that you're too old and you should retire, how does that make you feel? And just this, but my favorite one, does all of that political posturing make you cynical about Washington? Are they going to ask Mitchell McConnell that question? Probs not. Probs not.
Up next.
Oh, business section.
The New York Times, according to the Wall Street Journal,
Bank.
has added 180,000 digital subscribers, all of whom want to play Wordle.
And by the way, if anyone from the New York Times listens to this podcast, I have 2 pleas for you. Number 1, make connections, put connections in the app. Do you play Connections?
No, I don't even know what that is.
Connections is fabulous. It's like SAT prep. You get a bunch of words, and then you have to sort them into 4 that they're connected in some way, and you have to determine in what way. My eldest man-child and I play it daily. Please put it in the app. That would be great. And then they have a new game, which is amazing, which is a historical timeline game, where they give you 1 date in human history, 1 event in human history, and then they bring up the successive questions. You have to place them on the timeline around it. And I want to tell you, I am here for it. I love this game so much. It's so good, and it's weekly. So their game situation is they're peaking. But anyway, the real story here is
they have almost 10 million subscribers, that's a lot.
Yeah, and they are making a lot of revenue. The money is they're rolling in the doughboy, and the Athletic is a big part of that. An increase in total revenue of 55%. So the Athletic, games, things that aren't the news, are generating a lot of money for the New York Times and their quarterly numbers. Overall revenue increased 6.3% from a year earlier to $590.9 million, while net profit decreased $46.6 million, partly due to the one-time gain and an impairment charge this quarter, both of which were related to real estate. So the New York Times is really doing it.
All right, this much fawning over the New York Times makes me uncomfortable.
Well, that's fine, except to say this. the New York Times. So the Washington Post would like to be the New
They
York
would.
Times. They would really like to be the New York Times. A lot of places would really like to be the New York Times. What is happening in terms of the way that the Times, so basically the Times got out ahead of the Washington Post. Well, they were always ahead of the Washington Post, but they stole a march on the Washington Post at the beginning of the Trump era in terms of online subscriptions. Then the Post came and really caught up. They surged. They did a lot of clickbaity stuff. As I read in a great book, it's called Broken News, talked about optimizing for anger at the Washington Post. And the Times has now stolen another march and sort of moved ahead by moving out of just politically, and they were never this, but broadening their appeal to younger people.
Out of news and into cooking and games.
And it's the lifestyle epicenter energy is real, and they're succeeding with it. But you know where you can't do that? Welch, West Virginia. That's where you cannot do that. And that is the next item, which is, for me, personally painful, or it pains me about the story of the newspaper, the Welch News, which I have been to their offices.
You have?
Sure. I've been to their offices. I have read the Welch News for 100 years down in the West Virginia coal fields. The Welch News was down there, and now it is not there anymore. And here's the lead. Months after Missy Nestor ended the Welch News' 100-year run, she can barely stand to walk through the office doors of the newspaper her mother taught her to read with growing up in West Virginia's southern coalfields. It's still too painful. Welch News owner and publisher's desk is covered with unpaid bills and her own paychecks, a year's worth she never cashed. Phones that used to ring through the day have gone silent. Tables covered with typewriters, awards, and a century's worth of other long-abandoned artifacts are reminders that her beloved paper has become an artifact too. And this is just, I commend this piece to you and to our listeners because it is an excellent encapsulation of how local news, as the death of these local news outlets, what are the reverberations in these communities? What are the consequences? And the New York Times is crushing it, right? You can make a lot of money if you have a lot of money to invest with and do this and on this big format. So the story of news in decline is uneven even on the local level. But I would just really encourage everybody to read this and think about. And here's AP doing good work and read this story about how it happens and what happens after it's gone.
Chris, you sent the following story that went straight into my don't care bucket.
What?
Oh, over to you.
What is it? Oh
my gosh.
Oh, this from Pointer. Okay.
Yes.
So.
Nah. Who cares?
All right. Well, with that collegial setup, I will say. I
like that Colin's laughing.
A reporter for the Poynter Institute's Journal of Journalism explores the question of whether journalism should be designated as STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And it is, I believe the word is goofy-ah, to suggest that, and what makes it worse is the suggestion is coming from people who want to create a hack in the immigration system to allow journalism students to stay in America long enough to finish their degrees, which they cannot do because they're classified as being in the humanities. How can these foreign journalists stay in the United States to finish their degrees to work in American newspapers if we do not create this carve-out for them? And I would say this: go to Welch, go someplace and report on something, right? We don't need, and look, people want to get master's degrees in journalism. I'm not mad at you. If you want to teach journalism particularly, I got it. I understand. But go work, right? Don't go get your master's degree in journalism as soon as you're done with college. Go work. Go find someplace.
I am 100% on board with this. I am anti-journalism school. I think
if you want to go back later and get your master's,
I'm still against it.
I obviously have not done it because 4.5 years was more than enough college for me. But not that I learned all I could, but it was I enjoyed about all of it I could stand.
I am against it.
Journalism degrees are, to me, a dubious proposition, and certainly real world experience is what's necessary. And just as another broader point, it's not science, technology, engineering, or mathematics. God knows it's not mathematics. If you've ever watched a journalist try to do statistics, you know it is not mathematics. And don't make it that. Even if it's a trick, don't make it that.
Chris, it
Yes.
is time for our Facile File.
Oh, yes.
First up.
Did you know? Yes. Lay it on us.
We've been suffering from these heat waves.
Yep.
It's been really hot.
But are they racist?
They are racist.
I knew it.
According to The Guardian,
I knew it.
which reports racism at the heart of U.S. failure to tackle deadly heat waves.
Expert warns.
Yes. Jeff Goodell, author of The Heat Wave Will Kill You First, found, quote, engine of planetary chaos and travels from Antarctica to California. The Guardian reports. He told The Guardian that people of color, including millions of migrant workers who are bearing the brunt of record-breaking temperatures as farmhands, builders, and delivery workers, are not guaranteed life-saving measures like water and shade breaks because they're considered expendable. I don't really understand how that corresponds to them causing the heat.
Their indifference to people suffering is because they're black.
To be blunt about it, the people most impacted by heat are not the kind of voting demographic that gets any politician nervous. They're unsheltered people, poor people, agricultural and construction workers. So his argument really is that we're not tackling this because the people impacted by it are.
Yeah. According to Goodell, the risks faced by mostly black and brown workers also reveal enduring elements of scientific racism previously used to justify forcing enslaved African people to do backbreaking farm work in the scorching South. Quote, there were all kinds of crazy racist ideas like African people having thicker bones in their skulls that insulated them from heat. While nobody talks about that explicitly now, it is absolutely an undercurrent that having Mexicans pave roads in Austin in 107 degrees, 42 Celsius, is fine because they're from Mexico and used to it. Or what? Or what? Again, I would say to Mr. Goodell, poor people do not live as well as rich people. Income inequality is real. It is problematic in some ways. It is overstated in some ways. But the idea that if the immigrants coming to the United States were coming from white countries that were poor, they would also not be the one paving the roads, right? If there were, Irish, right? If we were seeing that kind of diaspora from a white country, you think they wouldn't be paving? You think that indifferent people of color sitting in air-conditioned rooms would not be happy to have Irish people paving the roads in 107-degree heat? What a bunch of crapola. This is the kind of thing. It cheapens what real racism is. I don't know which one of you found this, but that
was all Colin.
This is facileness. It's peak facile. If heat waves are racist, surely return to work isn't racist. Surely ending Zoom meetings is not racist, is it?
Let me just read from this LA Times article. As LaRon Barton weighed his options, he realized what he had to do. If he took a pay cut of $5,000, he could have a fully remote tech job that would let him roam the country and give him the flexibility he craved.
Sounds good.
Or he could keep his salary and stay at his current job. A network engineer, yada, yada.
San Francisco hospital.
Barton, who is black and working remotely during the pandemic showed him a whole different lifestyle. No commute, more time with his family, and a break from the onslaught of microaggressions and other racist behavior he had to endure. In 2021, just 3% of black white-collar knowledge workers wanted to return to full-time in-office work, compared to 21% of white ones.
Must be racism.
The research found hybrid or remote work arrangements increased black workers' feelings of belonging at work and boosted their ability to manage stress.
This is, I got to say, LA Times, I didn't think that anybody could top heat waves are racist this week, but that ending remote work is racist is truly amazing. That you were protected from microaggressions.
Well,
wow.
Chris, up next, speaking of racism, Lizzo is
this is my
lights are
fault.
on Lizzo right now
This is
because
my
of
fault.
alleged abuse and fat shaming of her like backup dancers or something.
Right.
And so the Daily Beast is out with a piece
Headline.
telling us that we should have known that this was coming because Lizzo was never as progressive as we wanted her to be. This is fully in my don't care bucket because I don't follow pop culture at all.
Oh, whereas I am deeply I'm in the content river of Lizzo.
More than I am.
I had never heard of Lizzo until she was given James Madison's flute. Do you remember when?
No, I didn't even know that happened.
So it was a whole thing. I forget which foreign potentate had made a gift of a crystal flute to James Madison when he was president, and that had gone to the Smithsonian. And for some special occasion, Lizzo, who is a rapper.
No, pop star.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
well, I knew that.
Okay, so Lizzo, a performer. We don't have Jay the intern or Nate Moore, though. I think Nate Moore Nate Moore, who is out this week. I don't know that we could rely on him as a reliable Lizzo cultural arbiter. But Colin has to do. Colin is as close as we're going to get. But when she was allowed to play this flute at some, you remember this? It was in D.C. and it was like at some special event. And here comes Lizzo. And I was like, who is this person in this getup? And why is she playing James Madison's flute? And at the time, the amount of coverage of this is so great. A founding father, slave owner, his flute is now against the lips of this blah, 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 blah. Take that, James Madison, et cetera, et cetera. And then Lizzo, as I understand, is being sued by a backup dancer, three backup
Something like
dancers,
that.
a trio of backup dancers.
For abuse, fat shaming, something like
for
that.
being basically James Brown. And being too demanding and too mean, and that it's a hostile work environment. And again, as if you are in the touring company of a pop musician and they're yelling at you and it's not good work conditions. I don't think anybody should have bad work conditions, but really? Like, I mean, come on. I've heard many such stories over the years. I just had to include this. I had to include this because the headline is as facile, you just couldn't get more facile than the Daily Beast under the subhead Truth Hurts, saying that Lizzo was never as progressive as we wanted her to be. Maybe she's a musician and a pop star, and maybe she is not. And by the way, I want to just say, stop calling things iconic. Rob Long, this is for the great Rob Long, this is a bugaboo for him. I share it. Lizzo didn't have to be an icon. You could have just liked her music, and that could have been sufficient.
Well, do your sports section thing, because I picked the style section, and I said this is hard-hitting journalism as
Turnabout is fair play.
Yes, and I just cannot wait to get to the style section.
Since you don't care, I will go ahead. I will begin with the beginning, which is the teams of Major League Baseball own, and certainly in the case of NASN, which used to be the Orioles only, or there's the Yes Network, doesn't matter. But these regional sports networks that air the games of these teams, whether it used to be Bally's, whether it's Fox Sports, whether it's whatever. And we've talked here before about all the upheaval that's gone on. Anyway, the announcer for NASN for the Orioles games, a guy named Kevin Brown, is very good. As an aficionado of sports announcing, Kevin Brown is excellent, and I see good things in his future. But not seeing good things in his future. So you don't know this, but the Orioles, who have been historically heinous, right? Like if you could demote a team out of the major leagues into AAA status, the Orioles would have been demoted a couple of seasons ago because they were just...
I definitely don't know this.
They were just awful. And this season, they're good. They're playing with spunk, and this pains me as a Cardinals fan the Cardinals are really struggling, but the Orioles are doing great. And in on a trip to Tampa Bay to cover them, Brown said the following. He said that the Orioles had won more games in 2023 at Tropicana Field, where they play, where the Rays play, than the previous 2 years combined. Now, that's a good, interesting fact, right? They've won more games this season so far than they did in the previous 2 seasons combined. He was suspended for 2 weeks at the behest, the Athletic reports, of the team's owner, John Angelos. And he was suspended for pointing out what is a good thing, right? You were bad before, you're good now. And he was suspended for that. And outcry follows, and people have blamed Angelos, and there's been all this backlash. But here's the thing, and when I talk to people about what they want in journalism, they say, why don't we have good journalism anymore? And I say, well, you need a lot of money. And they say, okay, well, we'll put a lot of money into it. And then you have to be okay with them saying things you don't like. And if you want to have a good sportscaster, they have to be able to talk about interesting stories, not just smooch the patooties of the owners constantly. And we see this with a lot of MLB coverage. We see it with hockey coverage. We see it with NFL is a crazy story of this stuff. As sports coverage becomes part of the corporate product, if even pointing out a good thing, which is that they're winning a lot more than they did in the previous 2 years, can knock you out, you're not going to have sports coverage at all, right? If that's too strong a wording, then you're not going to have sports coverage at all.
It is time, at long last, for our style section. I came across my favorite woman, Bethany Frankel's review of the new It bag on Instagram. So she's rich. So she goes and buys this new Bottega Veneta handbag and reviews it. Is it really all it's cracked up to be? Is it worth $5,000? And this is her review.
Another day, another fake news influencer story. Okay, so this is a bag that is Bottega, and it's known as the new It bag if you listen to influencers on social media. It's the bag that everybody needs to have, of course. Okay, it's $5,000. Now, I'm 5'5". Forget my hideous house dress, but let's just focus on the bag. It's under my breast. It's not, it can't be adjustable, so this is it. You get what you get and you don't get upset. This is a $5,000 bag from Bottega because Kylie Jenner says it's the best bag she ever had in her whole entire life. That's fake news because you can't even open it up and get in there. Like, at least, frankly, with an Hermes bag, you are paying a ton of money, but you can get in the thing. So I guarantee you, this costs like $100 to make. This is going back. Sorry, Bottega. This is not it for $5,000. For $800 to $1,200, maybe. The color's great. $5,000. Just letting you know, bought this to show you this. Sorry.
Chris, I mean, this is news you can use. I freaking loved this, and I love her.
So, Facile File, do they have a Chinese knockoff of this bag?
For sure. For sure.
Will you acquire this Chinese knockoff?
No, I don't even like the bag.
What's wrong with the bag? Other than what she
It's not cute.
It's not.
It's not cute. And she says it doesn't even open well, and I mean, she dissuaded me. It's not worth it.
News you can use.
She said, get the Hermes.
Bethany Frankel.
I loved it.
Get the Hermes. Yes, that's right. That's always the way.
Yes.
Out. That's always the way out.
Chris, it is now time for our Obsessions of the Week, where we break down the stories we can't get out of our heads. And my obsession of the week, there are a couple of stories that I thought were fantastic about Chinese influence in American universities and in American discourse. The first was a wonderful Free Beacon report by an intern who is only a rising sophomore in college. And I'm going to link that piece.
College journalist getting it done.
About a gift from a Chinese company to MIT that was used to fund MIT research on artificial intelligence. The company was later blacklisted by the Trump administration and is now under further sanction by the Biden administration for its role in surveilling the Uyghurs. And it's a fascinating story about the partnership between Chinese entities, American universities, the research they're funding, etc. Wonderful piece. I also loved the New York Times report. Headline, a global web of Chinese propaganda leads to a U.S. tech mogul. And it is a piece about how a big Democratic donor, his name is Neville Roy Singham.
Oh, quite.
And he's married to a founder of Code Pink, Jody Evans.
Okay.
And how various Chinese propaganda groups around the world are all traced back to him. He's funding them. And
what?
That, yes, it's super interesting. So in New Delhi, corporate filings show Mr. Singham's network financed a news site, NewsClick, that sprinkled its coverage with Chinese government talking points. China's history continues to inspire the working classes, one video said. These groups operate in coordination. They have cross-posted articles and shared one another's content on social media hundreds of times. Many share staff members and office space. They organize events together and interview one another's representatives without disclosing their ties. Now, even more interesting than that is that Code Pink used to protest Chinese human rights abuses. He married this Code Pink founder, Jody Evans, in 2016. And since then, Code Pink has become a Chinese stalking horse.
But Code Pink goes further.
Code Pink goes further, defending the Chinese government's policies. In a 2021 video, a staff member compared Hong Kong's pro-democracy demonstrators to the rioters who stormed the Capitol on January 6th that year. In June, Code Pink activists visited staff members on the House Select Committee on China unannounced. In the office of Representative Seth Moulton, Democrat of Massachusetts, activists denied evidence of forced labor in Xinjiang and said the congressman should visit and see how happy people were there, according to an aide. I just thought this was a fantastic report.
Way to go, New York Times.
I had no idea, and I loved the Code Pink aspect. So,
That's awesome.
Really interesting. And, like, the Chinese are hard at work spreading propaganda around the world.
And Code Pink just... bleh.
Embarrassing.
Yeah, the bleh. That's my commentary on that. Okay. Elizabeth Nolan Brown, writing at Reason, points to something I have talked about here before, and it is not just an obsession of the week, it is an obsession of all time. When we talk about what went wrong and who's to blame in American public life in our moment, it is fair to say that the rise of social media has played its part. But it is time for a corrective on this, and it is time for talking about, okay, but how much, right? And the way it basically was before, Democrats blamed Facebook for getting Donald Trump. This is a crass shorthanding of it. Democrats blame Facebook for getting Donald Trump elected, and Republicans blame Twitter for getting Joe Biden elected. And Facebook content was right-wing, Twitter content was left-wing, and people in the opposing parties blamed all of this. But there is also this generalized, and why am I drawing a blank on his name? He's the social psychologist who is leading the charge for age limits on social media these days.
It's funny that we were just joking that...
No, I can never remember
anybody's
name. I can never remember anybody. I can't remember my children's names. But anyway, it will come to me. He's a very famous social psychologist. But there's been this big push about the way that social media is breaking our brains. And no. New research looking at Facebook
Good try, Colin.
New research looking at Facebook in the run-up to the 2020 election finds scant evidence to suggest that social media algorithms are to blame for political polarization, extremism, or belief in misinformation. The findings are part of a project in which Meta opened its internal data to academic researchers. The results of this collaboration will be published in 16 papers, the first 4 of which were just published in the journal Science and Nature. One of the studies found that switching users from an algorithmic feed to a reverse chronological feed, something suggested by many social media foes as the responsible thing to do, actually led users seeing more political content and more potential misinformation. The change did lead to seeing less content, quote, classified as uncivil or containing slur words, and more content from, quote, moderate friends. But none of these shifts made a significant difference in terms of the user's political knowledge, attitudes, or polarization levels. Now, I'll say the same thing about this that I said about the Twitter files, which is obviously there's a collaboration here between the company and the people doing the research, and that Elizabeth Nolan Brown acknowledges that. And so I stipulate that stuff, and all of that is true. But we do now have some research that says that at least the most extreme claims about the way that social media broke our politics are not true. And that there's reason, no pun intended, to be skeptical of those things. And the Washington Post, I believe it's the Washington Post. I don't want to. Yes. Algorithms are extremely influential in terms of shaping their on-platform experiencing. Researcher Joshua Tucker, co-director of the Center for Social Media and Politics at New York University, told the Washington Post this. Told the Washington Post, despite this, quote, we find very little impact in changes to people's attitudes about politics and even people's self-reported participation around politics. And here's Brown. The Post piece on them contains this in-article ad after the first paragraph. Tech is not your friend. We are. Sign up for the Tech Friend newsletter. It's an almost perfect distillation of the larger dynamic at play here, in which traditional media, having lost ample eyeballs and advertising dollars to social media, seems intent to cast tech platforms as untrustworthy, unscrupulous, and dangerous for democracy, in contrast with the honest, virtual, and democracy-protecting members of the mainstream press. The Post piece goes on to, quote, 3 people uninvolved with the Facebook studies who have qualms about it, including Facebook whistleblower Frances Haugen. She argued that by the time the researchers evaluated the chronological approach during the fall of 2020, thousands of users had already joined mega groups that would have flooded their feeds with potentially problematic content. So there's the Post, moves the goalposts. Well, it wasn't this, it was actually that. And it's really not this, but we can't really see all of that. I just would say, and then I promise I will stop talking. I would just say the problem with social media is its users. At its core, the problem with with social media is it's us. And people are the best and wonderful and great, but we're also the worst. And it is a mirror that we're holding up to ourselves, and we don't like what we see. And I am not surprised that we don't like what we see, because human nature tends to be pretty gross. And I think Brown's point here about, and it's one that I always harp on, the media companies covering social media are not uninterested parties, right? They're not disinterested parties, rather. They have a dog in this fight. They see them as competitors. The Washington Post sees Facebook as a competitor, and there are advantages and disadvantages in both ways. But let's have a little cool water on this subject.
Chris, it is time for my favorite time of the week.
Yes.
Reader mail. First up, we have a note from Bill Deviney in Virginia, and Bill writes, Chris and Eliana, I enjoyed your episode about your favorite books and movies about journalism. Your discussion of Shattered Glass, a great and underrated movie, and Chris's comments about Charles Lane being a great person brought back a fond memory for me. My son, Wade, who has always wanted to be a journalist, is now a sophomore at the University of Maryland's Merrill. Is it Merrill or Merrill? I actually don't know. School of Journalism.
I'm gonna go with Merrill.
Okay, Merrill. His favorite movie is Shattered Glass. While he was in high school, we went to the actual restaurant that Stephen Glass claimed to have had dinner with Ian Rustle, but that closed at 3 on Sundays. The hours are still posted in the window of the actual restaurant, so I took a photo of my son smiling and pointing to the hours. As a surprise for my son, I printed an 8x10 copy of the photo and sent it to Charles Lane and asked him to sign it. Charles Lane signed it with the inscription, "Sorry, Wade, we're closed." He also included a very nice and encouraging note with the photo. My son recently says it is the coolest thing he owned. So you are not only a good judge of movies, but also of character. My son and I are big fans of your show. Keep up the quality work.
Oh, that is so stinking great. I love it, and I retract some of what I retract some of what I said about journalism school earlier. Just make sure
This is an undergrad school of journalism, I think.
But I would only say my one piece of advice, and yes, Chuck Lane is a great guy. He's a peach and a professional, and you are right to dig that, and that is really cool, and that demonstrates what a cool guy Chuck is, that he sent it back and put that note on it. But the one piece of advice, Wade, I would offer for you is, don't go to trade school. Make sure that you're taking lots of history classes, lots of other things. Learn about as much other stuff as you can while you're an undergraduate, because after you're out of college, we can teach you how to write an inverted pyramid lead on a story, but I can't tell you about the causes and consequences of the War of 1812 or how photosynthesis works. So get in there. Put College Park to get the most that you can out of College Park to get a broad liberal education, so that then you can be, like us, fake experts on things depending on what the day brings you.
Next up, we have a note from Leslie Boomer in Ohio. And Leslie writes, first, allow me to say that I enjoy the podcast very much, and today was no exception.
All right.
But I do take exception to the observation that all birds are ugly.
Oh, boy.
I am devoted to my Allbirds. Their wool athletic shoes are a gift to humankind in the winter, and their lightweight, cushy athletic shoes for summer are the best. And in my humble opinion, they are not unattractive in the least. Au contraire, they're my favorite. I felt compelled to defend my Allbirds as I've enjoyed them now for over 2 years running. Best shoes ever. Peace, and keep the podcast coming. I am a big fan, and I am always waiting patiently for them to drop. Well, I do think that the virtues you describe, Leslie, are more practical than aesthetic, but I take your point.
I want to say, and I don't know whether this is a he Leslie or a she Leslie, but I want to say that my son, my eldest son, he was on a plane listening to the podcast on his way to a youth retreat when he heard our condemnation of Allbirds. And I assure you, Leslie, that my son stands with you with Allbirds and takes serious umbrage at our denunciations of Allbirds. And I should say, I have a little confession to make around this stuff, and I want to be specific about it. So I think that adult men should wear real shoes, and that this is a sign that you are ready to enter mature adult life, is that you do not have dress sneakers that you wear to work. And obviously, if you're wearing Allbirds to exercise, or you're wearing Allbirds to go walk your chinchillas, do whatever you want to do. It's great. I'm all for you. But this summer, I have succumbed to temptation.
What did you buy?
The brand is called Patara, Patara, and they are super lightweight, rubber
They
sole.
look really ugly.
They're ugly.
Oh, they're not that bad.
Yeah, and I bought one pair for a trip for spring break.
They're not that bad.
Because they're light and you can pack them and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, they don't look so bad.
And I bought a second pair. And I feel ashamed because
But they're not good either.
I have worn for years, LL Bean makes something called a camp moccasin, which is a low-slung slip-on shoe that was my go-to summer shoe. And this is sustainable. I think elephants may make these shoes. I don't know. But they're very light and they're very comfortable. And now when I put my LL Bean camp moccasins on, they feel heavy. And they feel heavy on my feet. And I'm ashamed of myself. And I don't know if I'm ready to be a lightweight espadrille adjacent person. And
you're not adjacent. These are actually espadrilles.
Well, they're mock espadrilles because it's a rubber sole with a little. So this is me telling on myself and being accountable to myself about these silly shoes.
Chris, it is now time for your favorite time of the week.
Heck yeah.
When I am forced to say something nice. But lead us by example.
Wall Street Journal, Nevada town where the West is still wild. And they had Will Grant, who is the author of The Last Ride of the Pony Express, my 2,000-mile horseback journey across the Old West, write a little travelogue about his journey. and it is wonderful. It is corny in the best possible sense. It is sweet. It is smart. It's just great. And I recommend it very highly. Listen to this. I rode out of Middlegate Station thinking the Old West is not an anachronism. It's an ideology born from a land of little rain. It's the cultural manifestation of topography, climate, and location. You can find it in every state between the Missouri River and the Pacific Ocean. But in Nevada, it runs closer to the surface. At least that was my experience. That with hardly a shade tree but plenty of wind to blow your troubles away, the desert brings out the Old West's timeless qualities, even in the people who live there. Mwah.
My favorite item of the week was from the New York Times.
You're just loving the Times this week.
I really am. They were on fire this week. Headline, The Secret Hand Behind the Women Who Stood by Cuomo, His Sister. For nearly 2 years, Madeleine Cuomo quietly worked with grassroots activists to help smear her brother's accusers. He was, quote, seeing everything, she told his defenders. So Cuomo's sister, with his knowledge, was ginning up women to trash the women who were coming out and accusing Cuomo of mistreating them. So
Hillary
the Times
Clinton-esque.
writes, totally. It was a total Bill Clinton situation, including, this was the best part, good morning, just spoke, and he thinks a distraction could be helpful today, Ms. Cuomo wrote in the private text reviewed by the New York Times. This is to the group of, allies she's ginning up to trash these women. She suggested posting, quote, photos of Charlotte, which is one of the accusers, in her sex kitten straddle, taken from Ms. Bennett's Instagram account, potentially alongside more, quote, austere professional ones of loyal Cuomo aides. No respectable woman would ever pose like that, Ms. Cuomo added. She went on, bimbo photos, really despicable, unsophisticated girls.
Ooh.
And with that, enough said.
Yes, the temptation.
Enough said.
Yeah.
That is all the time we have for the news about the news. If you have a story you want us to talk about, email us at wretches@nebulouspodcasts.com and sign up for our newsletter at nebulouspodcasts.com. This has been Ink Stained Wretches from Nebulous Media, produced by Colin Chicola. Leave us a 5-star review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for Wretches.